Failure is one of the most misunderstood experiences in life. For many people, failure feels like the end of the road, a verdict that they are not good enough, smart enough, or capable enough. It's the word that stops dreams, silences ambition, and convinces us to stay in our comfort zones. But the truth is, failure is not the opposite of success. It is one of its essential ingredients. To fail smarter, not harder, means learning to see mistakes not as proof of inadequacy, but as powerful opportunities for growth, learning, and reinvention. Think about how we're conditioned to view failure. From school, we are taught that mistakes are bad. A wrong answer on a test is marked in red. A failed grade is stamped on a report card. Over time, we internalize the message. Failure equals shame. But in the real world outside of school, failure is often the first step toward mastery. Every inventor, entrepreneur, artist, or athlete who has achieved greatness has a trail of failures behind them. The difference between those who stay stuck and those who succeed is not the absence of mistakes, it's how they respond to them. One of the best ways to understand the power of failure is to look at real stories. Let's start with Walt Disney. Today, his name is synonymous with imagination, creativity, and success. But early in his career, Disney was fired from a newspaper job because his editor told him he lacked imagination. His first animation company went bankrupt. He faced rejection after rejection when trying to get funding for his ideas. A fixed mindset would have told him to quit, to accept that maybe he just wasn't cut out for the creative industry. But Disney chose a growth perspective. He used every setback as a lesson, refining his vision, his persistence, and his strategies. The empire he eventually built, Disney Studios, Disneyland, and a global brand, was born not despite his failures, but because of them. Another striking example is Steve Jobs. The co-founder of Apple is often celebrated for his innovation, but few remember that he was once fired from the very company he helped create. In 1985, after internal conflicts and declining sales, Jobs was ousted from Apple. For most people, this would have been the end. Imagine being told you are not good enough for the company you built. But Jobs later described this moment as one of the best things that happened to him. He used the time away from Apple to found Next and to invest in Pixar, which became a giant in animation. When Apple eventually bought Next, Jobs returned to the company with new skills, new perspective, and renewed vision. The products that transformed Apple into the global powerhouse it is today, the iPod, iPhone, and iPad, were created after his so-called failure. Failure can also be deeply personal, not just professional. Consider the story of Michael Jordan. Widely regarded as one of the greatest basketball players of all time, Jordan was once cut from his high school varsity team. That rejection could have fueled the belief, I'm not good enough to play basketball. But instead of quitting, Jordan used the setback as motivation to train harder. He later described that experience as the fire that fueled his career. Each failure became fuel for growth, not evidence of inadequacy. His career became a case study in resilience, showing that talent alone doesn't create greatness. Response to failure does. These stories highlight a critical truth. Failure is feedback. It gives us information about what doesn't work, about gaps in our skills, and about the changes we need to make. When we fail smarter, we don't just stumble blindly into mistakes. We reflect, analyze, and adapt. That's how failure becomes a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block. But why do so many of us still fear it? Part of the reason is cultural. In the United States, the myth of the self-made success often hides the dozens of failures behind every achievement. Media loves to highlight overnight successes, but rarely do we hear about the years of trial and error. In reality, failure is not a detour. It's the road itself. Silicon Valley even has a phrase for this: fail fast, fail forward. The idea is not to glorify mistakes, but to recognize that the faster you learn from them, the faster you reach innovation. So, what does it mean to fail smarter? It means reframing failure as part of the process, not the end. It means asking, what can I learn from this? Instead of saying, why me? It means documenting mistakes, looking for patterns, and using them as data points for growth. It means separating your identity from your performance, understanding that failing at something doesn't mean you are a failure as a person. The truth is, failure is not only unavoidable, it's necessary. If you're not failing at something, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough. Comfort zones may protect you from mistakes, but they also protect you from growth. Every successful person you admire has a resume filled with failures you've never seen. And yet, those failures didn't stop them, they shaped them. As we begin this exploration of failing smarter, remember this: the goal is not to avoid mistakes, but to use them as stepping stones. The next time you face failure, pause and remind yourself, this is not proof of my limits, it's proof that I'm trying. And in trying, I am learning. And in learning, I am growing. To truly understand how to fail smarter, we need to look at the psychology of failure. Why does failure feel so heavy? Why does it often paralyze us instead of propelling us forward? The answer lies in how our brains are wired, how we're conditioned by society, and how we interpret mistakes on a personal level. At the most basic level, failure triggers a primal reaction. When we make mistakes, our brain often interprets them as threats. This comes from ancient survival instincts. Thousands of years ago, being wrong about something, like where food was safe to eat or which animals were dangerous, could mean death. Our nervous system evolved to treat mistakes as dangerous, flooding us with stress hormones like cortisol. Even today, when the stakes are no longer survival, but rather a missed deadline or a failed test, our bodies react in the same way. We feel shame, fear, and anxiety because our brains associate failure with danger. But there's another layer: the ego. Failure doesn't just threaten our survival instincts, it threatens our identity. When you fail, it can feel like proof that your self-image is false. If you've always thought of yourself as smart and then fail an exam, the belief "I'm smart" is challenged. If you see yourself as competent at work but lose a project, your professional identity feels attacked. This is why failure hurts so much. It feels personal, as though it defines who we are. Psychologists explain that much of this pain comes from fixed mindset thinking. When you believe that intelligence or talent is fixed, failure becomes evidence that you lack those qualities permanently. But when you embrace a growth mindset, failure shifts meaning. Instead of being a verdict on your ability, it becomes feedback about your current level of skill. It doesn't say who you are, it says where you are. And where you are can always change. There's also the role of society and culture. From a young age, many of us are conditioned to see failure as shameful. In school, mistakes are marked in red. A failing grade is treated as disaster. In workplaces, errors can feel like career-ending events. Social media makes this worse by broadcasting curated highlight reels of success while hiding the messy behind-the-scenes failures. As a result, failure feels like something to hide rather than something to learn from. But neuroscience tells us that failure is actually critical for learning. When we make mistakes, our brains fire error signals that help us adjust and improve. Studies show that when people make errors and then reflect on them, their brains create stronger neural pathways for correct responses in the future. In other words, failure literally helps the brain rewire itself. Without failure, deep learning rarely happens. Think of how babies learn to walk. They fall hundreds of times. Each fall provides feedback, balance a little differently, shift weight another way. No baby ever thinks, "I'm not good at walking, so I should stop trying." Yet as adults, we adopt exactly that mindset in other areas of life. We forget that failure is the natural teacher. Another key piece of psychology is the concept of cognitive reframing. When we experience failure, our interpretation of it shapes our response. If we frame failure as catastrophe, we withdraw, give up, or avoid risks in the future. If we frame failure as feedback, we adjust, persist, and grow stronger. The failure itself doesn't change. The story we tell about it does. Consider a student who fails a math exam. One mindset says, "I'm terrible at math, and I'll never improve." Another mindset says, "I didn't prepare enough this time, so I need new strategies." The failure is identical, but the interpretations lead to two completely different outcomes. One path leads to giving up, the other to growth. Fear of failure also often stems from fear of judgment. We worry about what others will think if we fall short. This fear can be stronger than the failure itself. Many people never pursue dreams, not because they don't believe they can eventually succeed, but because they dread the embarrassment of failing in front of others. Yet research shows that people judge us far less harshly than we imagine. Most people are too focused on their own challenges to scrutinize ours for long. The shame we fear is often a story we create in our own minds. Failing smarter requires us to retrain our brain's responses. Instead of allowing stress hormones and ego to dominate, we can practice deliberate reframing. One simple method is to pause after a mistake and ask 3 questions. 1. What exactly happened? 2. What can I learn from this? 3. What can I do differently next time? This shifts the brain from panic to problem-solving mode. Over time, this habit reduces the fear associated with failure because you begin to see mistakes as normal parts of growth. It's also essential to practice self-compassion. Research by Kristin Neff and others shows that people who respond to failure with kindness toward themselves rather than harsh criticism are more resilient. When you say to yourself, "Everyone fails, this is part of learning, and I can try again," you calm your nervous system and open space for reflection. When you attack yourself, you create more stress, which actually makes learning harder. In summary, the psychology of failure shows us that our fear is not inevitable, it's conditioned. Failure feels painful because of survival instincts, ego threats, cultural conditioning, and fear of judgment. But when reframed, failure becomes the brain's way of learning, the ego's chance to grow, and society's myth to challenge. Failing smarter, then, is about changing the story. Failure is not final, it's feedback. It's not personal, it's a process. It's not proof of your limits, it's proof that you're trying. Understanding the psychology of failure is crucial, but the next step is learning how to apply practical frameworks that help us transform mistakes into opportunities. In the United States, especially in industries like technology, business, and education, there's a growing culture of using failure not as a final verdict, but as data, as stepping stones toward innovation. These strategies are tools that anyone can use, regardless of their background, to fail smarter rather than harder. One of the most famous frameworks is the Silicon Valley mantra, fail fast, fail forward. On the surface, it might sound like people are encouraging reckless mistakes, but that's not the case. The idea is to move quickly, experiment often, and treat failures as feedback loops. Instead of waiting months or years to perfect a plan, people test early, fail quickly, learn what doesn't work, and pivot. Each failure moves them forward toward a better solution. This principle has fueled countless startups. Companies like Airbnb and Uber didn't get everything right the first time. Their early versions were clumsy and criticized, but by failing fast, they gathered insights, adjusted, and grew stronger. The lesson here is clear. Failure isn't a sign to stop, it's a sign to refine. Another powerful practice is post-mortem journaling. In the business world, after a project fails, teams often conduct what's called a post-mortem analysis, where they examine what went wrong and why. But you don't need to be in business to use this method. You can apply it in your personal life too. After a failure, whether it's a failed exam, a relationship that ended, or a project that didn't work out, sit down and journal 3 things. 1. What went wrong? 2. What part of it was within my control? 3. What lessons can I carry forward? Writing it out removes the emotional fog and turns failure into a case study. Instead of obsessing over what you lost, you focus on what you gained. Over time, this practice builds resilience and helps you see failure less as a wall and more as a stepping stone. Another framework is the feedback loop. One reason failure feels so devastating is because we often keep it to ourselves. We hide mistakes out of embarrassment, which means we miss out on valuable feedback. But when you share your failures with trusted mentors, coaches, or peers, you gain new perspectives. Feedback transforms a closed door into an open path. In fact, some of the most successful American companies deliberately create cultures where employees are encouraged to share mistakes openly. This isn't about celebrating failure for its own sake. It's about extracting maximum learning from every attempt. For example, some schools in the US have adopted failure walls, where students publicly write down mistakes they made and what they learned from them. The goal isn't humiliation, it's normalization. By seeing that everyone makes mistakes, students learn that failure is part of growth. This same principle can be applied at home or in the workplace. By openly acknowledging mistakes and talking about lessons learned, we turn failure into a collective opportunity for growth. Another practical framework is small, controlled experiments. Instead of putting everything on the line, try taking smaller risks that let you test ideas without catastrophic consequences. Entrepreneurs often use this approach, launching minimum viable products to test market reactions before investing heavily. You can apply this in your personal life too. Want to change careers but fear failing? Start by freelancing on the side. Want to improve public speaking but fear embarrassment? Start by speaking up in small groups before tackling a large stage. Small experiments allow you to gather evidence of progress and build confidence without overwhelming pressure. Closely tied to this is the practice of incremental progress tracking. One of the most disheartening parts of failure is feeling like you're not making any progress. But when you track small improvements, you can see growth even in the midst of setbacks. Athletes often keep training logs to measure performance. Writers count words. Entrepreneurs track key metrics. Each small gain becomes proof that failure isn't final. It's just part of the upward curve. A lesser known but equally powerful framework is reframing failure language. The words we use to describe mistakes matter. Instead of saying, "I failed," you can say, "I experimented," or "I discovered one way that doesn't work." This is exactly what Thomas Edison did. When asked about his thousands of failed attempts at creating the light bulb, he famously said, "I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." This reframing turns failure from a heavy burden into a neutral or even positive event. You can apply this in your own life by deliberately choosing words that frame mistakes as part of learning. Another tool is resilience rituals. Many Americans use daily or weekly practices to bounce back from setbacks. Things like meditation, exercise, or gratitude journaling. These rituals regulate emotions, reset perspective, and provide energy to keep moving. Failure is not only about strategy, it's also about mindset. Having rituals that restore your mental and emotional balance ensures that mistakes don't spiral into self-doubt. Finally, one of the most important frameworks is celebrating attempts, not just outcomes. This means giving yourself credit for trying, even if the result wasn't what you hoped for. Parents, teachers, and leaders can foster this by praising effort and courage, rather than only success. In workplaces, this might mean recognizing employees who take risks and experiment, even when their projects don't pan out. In personal life, it might mean patting yourself on the back for showing up, even when you stumble. Celebrating attempts reinforces the belief that progress is about participation, persistence, and learning, not perfection. In all of these frameworks, failing fast, journaling, feedback loops, small experiments, reframing rituals, and celebrating effort, the underlying principle is the same. Failure is information. The smarter you use that information, the faster you grow. So failing smarter isn't about avoiding mistakes, it's about embracing them with intention. It's about replacing the question, "How do I avoid failure?" with "How can I use failure to learn faster?" Once you adopt that mindset, every mistake becomes an opportunity, every setback a lesson, and every stumble a step forward. Now that we've explored frameworks for turning failure into opportunity, let's bring it to life with real case studies. Across the United States, countless stories illustrate how individuals and organizations applied these principles, transforming painful setbacks into breakthroughs. These examples prove that failure isn't a dead end. It's often the very thing that creates the foundation for lasting success. Let's start with the tech world, where failure is often seen as part of the culture. One famous case is Airbnb, when the founders Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia launched their idea of renting out air mattresses in their apartment. Investors laughed. In fact, they were rejected by multiple venture capital firms. Their early attempts failed to gain traction, and at one point they resorted to selling cereal boxes during the 2008 election just to keep the company afloat. But instead of giving up, they treated those failures as feedback. They realized their platform needed trust, professional branding, and better user experience. By failing fast and adjusting, Airbnb evolved from a struggling idea into one of the most disruptive hospitality companies in the world. Another powerful case is Sarah Blakely, the founder of Setbacks. Blakely often talks about how her father reframed failure for her when she was a child. At the dinner table, he would ask, "What did you fail at this week?" If she didn't have an answer, he would be disappointed, not because he wanted her to succeed every time, but because he wanted her to try. This mindset helped her as an entrepreneur. She faced countless rejections when pitching her idea for women's shapewear, but she kept going. Today, she is one of the first self-made female billionaires in America. Her story shows how reframing failure as learning rather than shame can change an entire trajectory. In sports, failure is not only common, it's essential. Take Tom Brady, one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history. Brady was not a top draft pick. In fact, he was famously selected in the 6th round of the 2000 NFL draft, number 199 overall. Many believed he wasn't athletic enough, strong enough, or fast enough to excel at the professional level. Instead of internalizing those limiting beliefs, Brady used the rejection as motivation. He studied harder, trained harder, and mastered the mental side of the game. His early failure in the draft became fuel for a career that would redefine excellence in football. Education provides another lens into how failure can transform outcomes. Consider the KIPP schools, Knowledge is Power program, across the United States. These charter schools emphasize grit, growth mindset, and resilience. Instead of punishing students for failure, KIPP schools teach students to analyze mistakes, persist through challenges, and celebrate effort. The results have been remarkable. Students from underprivileged backgrounds who once believed college was out of reach are now graduating at much higher rates. These schools prove that when failure is normalized and reframed, entire groups of students can break free from limiting narratives. Another case study worth mentioning is Elon Musk and SpaceX. Musk has often said that failure is an essential part of innovation. When SpaceX launched its early rockets, the first 3 exploded. Each explosion cost millions of dollars and led critics to call the company doomed. But instead of folding, Musk and his team meticulously studied each failure. The 4th launch finally succeeded, and it became the turning point for SpaceX, securing a NASA contract that saved the company. Today, SpaceX is leading the way in space exploration and reusable rockets. Their success is built directly on a foundation of failure and the refusal to let those failures go to waste. Failure stories don't always involve billion-dollar companies. Consider small entrepreneurs across America who start businesses, fail, and start again. Statistics show that many small businesses close within the first few years. But research also shows that entrepreneurs who fail once and try again are more likely to succeed the second time. Why? Because failure teaches them what doesn't work. They learn about financial management, customer needs, and market timing. Each failure sharpens their skills. These quiet success stories, less visible than Silicon Valley giants, show how ordinary people transform failure into progress every day. We can also learn from history. Think about Abraham Lincoln. Before becoming the 16th President of the United States, Lincoln faced a series of personal and political failures. He lost his job, failed in business, and suffered multiple political defeats before finally winning the presidency. His resilience in the face of repeated setbacks prepared him to lead the country during one of its darkest times, the Civil War. Lincoln's story demonstrates how long-term vision and persistence can turn repeated failures into ultimate success. What ties all these examples together is a common pattern. Failure provided critical lessons that success alone could never have taught. Airbnb learned about trust and user experience. Sarah Blakely learned persistence. Tom Brady learned discipline. KIPP students learned resilience. Elon Musk learned technical precision. Lincoln learned endurance. In every case, failure was not the end, it was the teacher. The message here is clear. Failure is not the opposite of achievement, it's the foundation of it. When we shift our perspective, failure becomes less about shame and more about strategy. Each misstep provides data, direction, and determination for the next attempt. As you reflect on these case studies, ask yourself, what is one failure in your own life that you've been treating as the end? Could it actually be the beginning of a new path? Could the lessons buried in that mistake become the seeds of future success? The answer, if you adopt the mindset of failing smarter, is yes. Failure doesn't only affect individuals. The way we view mistakes shapes entire cultures, workplaces, schools, and communities. When organizations treat failure as something to be hidden, punished, or avoided, innovation dies, students lose curiosity, and communities feel stuck. But when failure is reframed as feedback, entire systems transform. Embracing failure creates environments where people experiment, adapt, and ultimately thrive together. Let's begin with workplaces. In traditional companies, the unspoken rule is, don't fail. Employees may believe that a mistake will ruin their reputation, cost them promotions, or even jeopardize their job. As a result, people play it safe. They don't share bold ideas, they avoid risk, and they focus on protecting themselves instead of contributing creatively. This culture of fear keeps organizations stagnant. Now contrast with companies that deliberately create a fail-friendly culture. These organizations don't glorify failure, but they normalize it as part of innovation. For example, some tech companies in the US hold failure post-mortems or blameless retrospectives, where teams openly analyze what went wrong in a project. The goal isn't to shame individuals, but to extract lessons. Leaders ask, what did we learn and how can we improve? By treating failure as data, they create a culture where employees feel safe to experiment. This safety fuels innovation because people aren't paralyzed by the fear of mistakes. The ripple effect is powerful. Employees who know they won't be punished for failing are more likely to try creative approaches, test new products, and propose fresh solutions. Over time, this mindset drives breakthroughs. The difference between a stagnant organization and a thriving one often comes down to whether it punishes or leverages failure. Schools provide another powerful example. For decades, education has reinforced the message that mistakes are shameful. Students who answer incorrectly are embarrassed in front of classmates. Tests are graded with red marks that highlight errors. Over time, children internalize the belief that being wrong is bad, which stifles curiosity. They avoid raising their hands unless they're sure of the answer. They stick to safe paths and lose the willingness to explore. But innovative schools across America are shifting this narrative. Some classrooms now use growth mindset language, encouraging students to see mistakes as learning opportunities. Teachers celebrate effort and persistence rather than just correct answers. They say, you don't know it yet, instead of, you're wrong. These small shifts create an environment where students feel safe to try, fail, and try again. The result? Higher engagement, greater resilience, and more creativity. Students learn that intelligence is not fixed, it grows through effort and error. Communities also carry collective beliefs about failure. In struggling neighborhoods, failure is often seen as permanent. A business closes, and people conclude that entrepreneurship doesn't work here. A student drops out, and others think education isn't for people like them. These shared beliefs can trap entire communities in cycles of hopelessness. But when communities embrace failure as part of progress, the narrative changes. Take local entrepreneurship programs that encourage residents to launch small businesses, even if the first attempts don't succeed. These programs often provide mentorship and resources, but more importantly, they normalize failure. They send the message, if your first business doesn't work, try again. Each attempt builds experience. Over time, communities with this mindset see rising confidence, more startups, and greater resilience. Failure stops being the end and becomes part of growth. The ripple effect extends further. Families that model resilience teach children to see setbacks as temporary. Sports teams that embrace failure create athletes who are mentally tougher. Non-profits that normalize mistakes build leaders who are creative and persistent. Every time a group shifts its relationship with failure, it multiplies the benefits across members. Even healthcare shows the power of cultural attitudes toward failure. In some hospitals, mistakes are hidden out of fear of punishment, which can compromise patient safety. But in hospitals that adopt just culture models, errors are openly reported and studied. Instead of blaming individuals, the focus is on fixing systems. This reduces repeat mistakes and improves outcomes for patients. Here again, the difference is clear. Hiding failure harms, while learning from failure heals. Why does this matter so much? Because humans are social creatures. We take cues from the environments we're part of. If your workplace punishes mistakes, you'll likely adopt a fear-based mindset. If your school ridicules errors, you'll carry shame into adulthood. But if your community celebrates persistence and reframes setbacks, you'll internalize resilience. In short, collective beliefs about failure shape individual mindsets. The exciting part is that you can influence this culture, no matter where you are. If you're a manager, you can encourage your team to share lessons learned from mistakes. If you're a teacher, you can praise effort, not just right answers. If you're a parent, you can normalize failure at the dinner table by asking, "What did you learn today?" rather than only, "What did you achieve?" If you're a community member, you can support those who try, even when they stumble. Each action plants seeds of a culture that sees failure as progress. Ultimately, embracing failure at a collective level creates environments where people take risks, innovate, and grow. Workplaces become more creative. Schools produce more resilient learners. Communities break cycles of hopelessness. Families raise children who believe in persistence. This is how the ripple effect of failing smarter transforms not just lives, but entire systems. So the question is this: what culture are you part of? Does it punish failure or learn from it? And what role can you play in shifting that culture toward resilience, growth, and opportunity? The change starts with individuals, but its impact multiplies when groups adopt it together. Failure is a word that often carries heavy weight. For many, it feels like the final stamp of judgment, proof that they weren't good enough, smart enough, or prepared enough. But as we've explored, that isn't the truth. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is the very path to it. Every story of greatness carries chapters of mistakes, detours, and setbacks. The people who rise are not those who avoid failure, but those who know how to use it. When you look back at the case studies we've covered, the pattern is clear. Sarah Blakely turned the pain of rejection into the foundation of Spanx, a billion-dollar empire. Steve Jobs transformed his firing from Apple into the creative rebirth that gave the world the iPhone. Oprah Winfrey used public embarrassment as fuel to build one of the most influential media careers in history. None of these stories were written in straight lines. Each was shaped by detours, closed doors, and the courage to keep moving forward. This pattern is not reserved for extraordinary figures. It applies to you too. Whether you're building a career, starting a business, pursuing education, or simply working to improve yourself, failure is not an enemy to avoid. It's a mentor, a guide, a sculptor, shaping you into someone stronger, wiser, and more capable. Every setback is feedback. Every rejection is redirection. Every mistake is a lesson written in bold ink. The science of failure explains why this is true. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, means that when you fail and reflect, you are literally carving new pathways in your mind. You're building resilience like a muscle. With each attempt, your brain adapts, becoming sharper and more prepared for the next challenge. This is why children who are taught to see mistakes as opportunities often grow into adults who thrive under pressure. Their brains have been trained not to collapse at the sight of failure, but to learn and adapt. But here's the key. Failure only becomes growth if you choose to face it with courage. Too often, people encounter mistakes and retreat into shame. They let fear dictate their choices. They avoid risks, silence their ideas, and hold themselves back. That is when failure becomes permanent, when you stop trying. The true danger is not in failing, but in refusing to rise again. So how do you transform your relationship with failure? Start by reframing it. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" ask, "What can I learn from this?" Instead of saying, "I failed," say, "I discovered one way that didn't work." This shift in language rewires your mindset. It allows you to see mistakes as stepping stones instead of roadblocks. Next, normalize failure in your daily life. Set goals that stretch you beyond your comfort zone. Try something new each week, a skill, a habit, a challenge that risks imperfection. Celebrate effort as much as results. And when failure comes, pause to extract its lessons. Journal about what went wrong, what you learned, and how you'll adapt. Over time, these practices make resilience your default response. And finally, surround yourself with people and environments that support growth. Join communities that celebrate persistence. Seek mentors who share their failures openly. Encourage friends and family to take risks without shame. Remember, as we explored in the ripple effect, collective beliefs about failure shape individual ones. When you create a circle where setbacks are embraced as progress, you'll find the courage to keep moving forward, no matter how many times you stumble. Now, let's return to the big picture. The world is changing rapidly. New technologies, shifting economies, and evolving challenges demand resilience like never before. In this landscape, those who fear failure will shrink back, But those who fail smarter will lead. They will innovate, adapt, and inspire others to do the same. They will see mistakes not as barriers, but as invitations to grow. So ask yourself, what failure in your life have you been avoiding, hiding, or carrying as shame? And what would happen if you reframed it as a lesson, a teacher, even a gift? That shift could unlock the next chapter of your journey. The truth is simple. Failing smarter means living braver. It means trading fear for curiosity, shame for growth, and hesitation for action. It means choosing to rise every time you fall. Success is not about avoiding failure, it's about mastering it. If this message resonates with you, take a moment now to reflect on your own journey. Think of one failure that shaped you, one mistake that taught you, one rejection that redirected you. Hold on to that story and use it as fuel. Let it remind you that you are not broken by failure, you are built by it. And as you continue building, remember, you are not alone. Millions of people are on this same path, learning to turn mistakes into opportunities. Together, we can create a culture that celebrates resilience and growth. Before we close, I want to invite you to take the next step with us. If this video inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit the like button, share it with someone who might need encouragement today, and subscribe to Think Fresh Daily for more videos that will challenge your perspective, inspire your mindset, and fuel your growth. Every week, we bring you insights that help you reframe challenges, embrace resilience, and unlock the best version of yourself. By subscribing, you're joining a community that believes in growth, persistence, and possibility. And together, we can learn not just to fail, but to fail smarter. So if you're ready to stop holding back and start moving forward, click subscribe now. Let's walk this journey together, one step, one lesson, and yes, even one failure at a time. Because here at Think Fresh Daily, we don't just talk about growth,